Welcome everyone to the Empowering Women and Girls session at the Social Innovation Summit 2020. We're very happy that we could gather here together today. My name is Tara Abrahams and I am a Managing Director at Arabella Advisors, which is a philanthropic advisory firm based in Washington, DC. I'm also the proud board chair of She's the First, an organization that fights for girls' rights around the world. Before we begin, I do want to pause and acknowledge the heart-wrenching moment that our country is in, and especially to honor the lives of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many others before them. Black citizens who died as victims of persistent racial injustice, of racism, which continue to prevent our nation from living up to its promise together. I also want to acknowledge and thank the Black activists, artists, writers, lawyers, community members who are fighting every single day for their lives, protesting amidst a global pandemic for a better country, a better future, and for their right to breathe. So thank you again, all of you, for being here, and especially to our panelists, who will introduce themselves in just a moment. I want to get quickly into the conversation, as I know we have limited time, but I did want to take just a minute to ground us all in some of the most recent stories and data that are coming out related to gender, particularly amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. While the virus itself is hitting men, and particularly African-American men and men of color, in higher numbers than women, we also know that this pandemic is going to exacerbate existing gender disparities. According to the Fuller Project, women have outnumbered men in coronavirus-related job losses by an estimated 2.1 million in the United States. As lockdowns continue globally, domestic violence around the world has reportedly increased by as much as 30 to 35% in some countries. When home is not safe, women are facing daily threats to their lives beyond COVID-19. Experts warn us that the pandemic could result in an additional 13 million child marriages over the next decade, which is on top of the 12 million girls every year who are married off before the age of 18. Until schools open again, one of the major sources of protection and safety for girls is completely cut off. This is to say nothing of the fact that even before the pandemic, anti-Black biases and discrimination regularly deny Black girls their right to be girls in a phenomenon known as adultification, where Black girls must deal with perceptions that they are more mature and therefore in need of less protection. Against this daunting backdrop, we're fortunate to have a wonderful panel of experts here today who can help us navigate some of these looming challenges and also offer us a measure of hope. They represent both the girl and the woman perspective, an important distinction as they will share with you. I'll begin by giving each of them the opportunity to put a face and a voice to their name and organization. So Adele, if I could start with you, please.
Thanks so much, Tara, and thank you so much for that introduction. That's incredibly important, and I couldn't have sort of said it better myself. My name is Adele Langton. I am the Vice President of the 10,000 Women Program at Goldman Sachs. 10,000 Women is a 12-year-old program which has a commitment to supporting women entrepreneurs in emerging markets by providing a business education, think a mini MBA, access to capital, access to networking and mentors. And really, if you think about the investment thesis of 10,000 Women, it's really about this idea that small businesses are the engines of our economy. When you're investing in a small business owner, in a female entrepreneur, you are investing in their community and you're actually investing in the economy more broadly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Crystal, can I turn to you next, please?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Tara, for setting the context for today. My name is Crystal Brown. I am the National Vice President of Youth Development Programs at Boys and Girls Clubs of America. We sit in the out-of-time school space. We are a nonprofit that has serves over 4.6 million kids across the country, and really thinking about how do we create linkages between the school and families and provide supports in a youth development context. And so we have programming experiences to drive 3 primary outcomes: academic success, good character, and healthy lifestyles. And so really have thought about what does it mean to create change for young people to ensure that they're life and work ready, with an emphasis on key essential social emotional skills. So glad to be with everyone today.
Thank you so much for being here, Crystal. And then finally, Jonathan.
Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Makai and I'm the acting CEO of Girl Effect. Founded by Nike almost 15 years ago, Girl Effect is now an independent nonprofit, and we work in over 50 countries, reaching more than 20 million people every year, providing adolescent girls with the information, the motivation, and the ability to access life-saving opportunities and services. We recognize that adolescence is a pivotal time for girls. The choices that they make, the opportunities they take advantage of while they're teenagers, will determine the rest of their lives to some extent. And so we believe that this is the moment in which we can intervene and make a real difference to girls now and women in the future.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Again, welcome to all of you. Thank you for making the time to be here today. Crystal, I'd like to start with you a little bit closer to home, since all of us are based right now, at least in the United States, here on the panel. You offer the perspective of working very closely with girls and boys, of course, but here in the US. But I'd love to just hear a little bit more your thoughts on the unique barriers faced by girls in this country, particularly in communities served by Boys and Girls Club of America.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so, you know, a number of studies have shown the change over time as it relates to what's happening with girls, and really appreciative for Girl Scouts and their State of the Girl reports that really think about what are the indicators across a variety of domains to think about what's happening with girls. So when you think economically, we know that more girls are living in poverty. When you think about physical health, we see, and lots of studies show this, the decline in physical activity, the decline in sports participation. Emotional health, you see increases of suicidal ideation. You see girls being report that they're greater victims of cyberbullying. So when you think about the whole child and all of the factors that are impacting the experiences that girls have, it's critically important that we think about how we dimensionalize the way in which we work with young people. And so Boys and Girls Clubs has a unique position in that we have clubs on military installations, we have clubs on native lands, we have clubs in urban centers and in rural America. And so, you know, club leaders are really thinking about what is happening in my local community with girls, and really thinking about how do I, through what we do, differentiate staff practices, differentiate instructional design to make sure that the needs of girls are at the center. What I love so much is this focus on identity development. That no matter where a girl is and the circumstances that she's up against, is that identity development is critical to ensuring that a young woman can be engaged. So there are a couple of essential factors that we found in Boys and Girls Clubs that really work and make the difference for young women and young girls. Engagement, making sure that we differentiate the ways in which we're working with girls, how we're asking them questions, how we're putting their priorities at the center. We think about relevance. What's relevant for a girl? So I am from Chicago. I was a poet. I pulled on that as a place to raise my voice. And so thinking about what are our girls into and how do we use that as a lever for skill development. Opportunities for co-creation and leadership as a critical factor in ensuring that a young person is meaningfully engaged in their own development and their experience. Relationships And the key is this positive girl-centric culture. We see that no matter what the barriers, if you create a culture that is grounded by bringing girls together and talking about explicitly the unique differences and similarities, they start to build a community that they use as a lever. So those are critical. And so, you know, what we love so much is the way in which Boys and Girls Clubs really puts the experience of a girl at the center and then says, so what does our programming and experiences need to be to ensure we best meet the needs of girls? Because at the end of the day, I think we all want to ensure that there is an application of skills and that girls and women can be fierce in the workplace and be fierce in higher ed and be fierce in every domain of their lives. And those skills are essential for them to demonstrate that fierceness.
Absolutely. I know that your daughter Jubilee may be wandering around there, and boy, is she a lucky girl with you as her mama. You mentioned how, I think, tailored programs on military bases, native lands, and probably everything in between. Can you speak to what kind of design challenges that creates for you as an organization, given that, of course, as you're talking about things like relevance and engagement, it may be that a girl who's on a native reservation finds different things relevant than perhaps an urban area. So just could you speak to that a little bit from your experience?
Absolutely. You know, we've gotten really clear about our instructional design practices and making sure that no matter the girl engaging with our curricula, we build in success measures from the front. And so there's always opportunity for girls to develop group agreements together, for them to share who they are, for them to think about what makes them safe. And so nationally, we try to think about what those core components are. But there are really three things we prioritize when we think about instruction nationally. The first is around high quality staff practice, right? This focus, laser focus on quality. What are the things that a facilitator says and does to ensure the experience is safe and the experience is engaging? So we've gotten really clear about what those things are, and we have found that the more engaging and the more confident a facilitator is, the better they're able to engage young people and then ultimately begin to engage young people in skill practice. The other is about essential girl experiences, and that it is not about just the curricula itself. We've seen this amazing practitioner-based shift in terms of how local clubs think about serving girls. There is a need for more holistic models. So, you know, local clubs are not only running curricula, they're doing book clubs, they're doing service projects, they're doing knitting circles, they're doing things, wraparound experiences that really elevate the experience for girls. And so we think about what those experiences are. And then we think about what's skill development look like, and really not thinking about just cognitive development or just physical health, but really thinking about physical health knowledge, emotional health, and social health behaviors. And so really taking this whole child, whole girl approach to ensuring that we maximize the opportunities that we have. And so nationally, that's how we approach our curricula, and then help local clubs determine what can you modularize? What do you add? What do you take out? I would be remiss if I did not shout out our Native Services team and Ms. Carla Knapp. Her team then takes our curricula and says, for Native young people, what are those other experiences that we can bake in? And they really then translate for cultural relevance. And so it is a beautiful intersection of making sure that we are guided by the literature and we're guided by what drives outcomes, but provide the guidance on what are those other elements that are important to put the girl at the center, to ensure that we're not just doing a curricula for curricula's sake, but it really is about what a girl needs to really just sit at the table and to be a part of something bigger than herself.
Fantastic. I love what you said about this idea of translating and cultural relevance. It's actually a really nice transition and segue to the work, Jonathan, that you're doing globally at the Girl Effect. And so I'd love to turn to you next. Thank you so much, Crystal. You know, Girl Effect, as it would imply, is working with girls as well and has been doing so for 15 years. So what are you seeing at Girl Effect 15 years on what's different about your work with girls now than it had been before, particularly given the pandemic?
As an organization, Girl Effect has had quite an interesting history, and we've made several significant pivots in a short time, in 15 years. It's not really much time when you look back on it. And I think in some ways we still feel like a teenage organization ourselves, a little bit spotty. When we were first launched, we were an advocacy organization working to get girls on the global agenda, to convince people that they needed to be investing in adolescent girls. Having worked with a number of different organizations to get girls onto the stage at Gavi in front of the UN General Assembly, we shifted our focus to become an investor in girl-centered programs. Okay. We realized at the time that we drummed up all this interest in girls, but needed to direct it somewhere, and there weren't many mechanisms to actually invest in programs for girls. So we brought together organizations all over the world and built up their capacity to cater to girls' needs, and built or contributed to the evidence base for what works. And it's at that point that we realized that you can create a vocational training program for girls. You can create a safe space club that she can go to after school. You can create a space for her in a school itself. You can build the schools, build the clinics. But if a girl doesn't want to access those services, if she doesn't feel that they are relevant to her, and this is echoing what Crystal was saying, if she's not engaged by those services, she's not going to go there. So the important role that Girl Effect now plays is in driving large-scale demand for the services that will change their lives. In India, that means providing girls with a digital ecosystem of content and services that they can use to get access to contraception in a clinic. Mm-hmm. And what we're changing about a lot of the way that we work, highlighted by the India example, is that we're placing a big bet on digital as a way that we're going to reach girls at scale. It's one of the things that we've seen over the last 15 years is that media access in households has changed in unfathomable ways, or ways that would have been unfathomable just a few years ago. In a single generation, you've gone from a household not having access to a TV, a computer, a landline phone, and now in the coronavirus pandemic, we're seeing phones being a literal lifeline to girls who are trapped at home and who need access to support, to services. We are building chatbots to provide girls with answers to sensitive questions about their bodies and about sex. And our chatbot in South Africa and in India is providing non-judgmental advice to girls. And that's one of the things that has been a surprising discovery for us, that they actually appreciate the fact that they're not talking to a person. In the last month, we've had over 27,000 conversations started by girls in those two countries. And the fact that we're able to create a product that works in two, sometimes in some ways, very different countries is something else that I think has changed in the last 15 years. Because we are seeing the emergence of something like a global youth culture, thanks to the internet, thanks to social media. And through the data that we're gathering, we're seeing that, yes, the experience of a girl in Nigeria is different to a girl in Tanzania, is different to a girl in Bangladesh. But girls everywhere are dealing with the worries that they have around their periods, don't know how to talk to their boyfriends about sex, don't know how to negotiate time to do homework with their parents when their parents expect them to do chores. There are some universal truths about being a girl, and our work now is building on those two major shifts. You know, the media that we have to connect girls all over the world, and an emerging culture that allows us to speak to them in ways that are relevant and engaging. And I think with COVID, yes, we've seen a lot of on-the-ground services curtailed, constrained. But we think it's going to remove some of the last remaining bits of friction from the system that are preventing more significant investment in digital opportunities for adolescent girls. And there's a new generation coming online, and we need to be there to meet them now. We can't wait for every single girl to have access to a phone, because if we do, it'll be too late.
So given that sort of, I think you mentioned it so visual almost, of the kind of the friction and taking that away, what advice would you or guidance would you give to leaders and organizations who are now looking to reach girls who are seemingly so hard to reach? Sort of what opportunity has opened up, and what kind of principles would you suggest that organizations apply in the next 15 years as they think about doing their work as well?
I think I'd actually echo something that Crystal said as the most important piece of advice I could give someone, and that's to put girls at the center, to make sure that your programming is informed by what girls are telling you that they need. We have a program called Technology-Enabled Girl Ambassadors, and through that program, we actually involve girls in the development of programming, the testing of concepts. We were working with a large humanitarian organization in Northeast Nigeria, and they were really struggling to get food parcels distributed equitably to the families that they were serving. And they couldn't figure out why, but our technology-enabled girl ambassadors went out and spoke to girls in the community and got insights from other girls about what was going wrong in the system. And thanks to them, the way that the humanitarian organization was distributing the food parcels changed. It was, instead of being delivered to the male head of the household, the parcels were then delivered to the female, the maternal figure, who was, unsurprisingly and sadly for men, better at making sure that there was equitable distribution. I've got a lot of other examples of the way that talking to girls has challenged an assumption that we've had about what they might want or need, and changed our programming. And in addition to putting girls, involving them in the creation process, it's important to keep them involved through the entire journey that you take them on. It's not enough to just, we got a bunch of ideas from girls in a workshop. The program, girl co-creation done. Unless
Check.
you are, check. Unless you are learning from them at every step, your work isn't going to respond to their changing needs. I think this pandemic is an example of the fact that you can't possibly hope to create something, put it out into the world, and just expect that it's going to succeed, rain, hail, or shine. You need to be creating things in ways that put you in direct contact with girls so that you can respond to their changing needs.
And also do so on a real-time basis. So technology seems to be able to afford you that opportunity to continue that cycle of co-creation that both you and Crystal identified as such key elements of your work. It's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I would like to turn to Adele, but also just want to take a quick moment to pause and remind our participants that if you have a question, please do enter it in the Q&A box on Zoom so that we will be able to take those a little bit later on in the hour that we have. But Adele, I'd love to bring you in to sort of speak to the woman perspective, as you're here, of course, to talk about the work of 10,000 Women at Goldman Sachs, which has this particular focus on women in entrepreneurship, as you described for introduction. So tell us more about that. How does 10,000 Women tackle that gender gap in entrepreneurship? What are those specific tools that you have found most critical to the success of women in the field of entrepreneurship?
Mm-hmm. So from a 10,000 Women perspective, we think about you talked about tools. So I'd say there's really two major tools that we think about. We have our business education program, which is, as I said, akin to a mini MBA. Think about sales, marketing, finance, all the subjects that you'd find in any MBA program across the world. And we've been reflecting on that curriculum a lot through COVID. These subjects, these are lessons and tools that women need at any point in time, but particularly in light of COVID, they're more important than ever. We're looking at women who are urgently needing to stay liquid, to immediately strategize and pivot and reach new markets and new customers in incredibly tight markets. So more than ever, that business curriculum is one of our major tools. We also have an access to capital tool. 10,000 Women started in 2008 as a business education program. But what we were hearing from our first graduates was that they really needed more capital. And so we formed a partnership in 2014 with the International Finance Corp, part of the World Bank Group, whereby we established a fund, the first ever facility or fund dedicated exclusively to female entrepreneurs. And through that program, we've been getting more capital in the hands of women across the world, actually to the tune of 70,000 women who've been impacted over the past 5 years. So you asked about the tools, those are the tools I can outline, but zooming out, what we really think from a 10,000 Women perspective is we're providing a framework and we're providing opportunity. What those women then take with it and go on to do, that is creating the lasting impact. They are creating a community, and that community lives on well past the Goldman Sachs presence. we like to say that there's a catalytic impact of our programming. We monitor our graduates after they complete the program, and a staggering 9 out of 10 go on to help other women. On average, they mentor 8 women in their community. They set up women's organizations and trade groups and networking groups that didn't exist before. They invest in individual women. They train them. They take them on. So when you think about what women, these women entrepreneurs are running successful businesses. More often they're not running the family and contributing to their community. It's pretty impressive. And it's not just about them creating opportunities for their networks. We're really talking about intergenerational opportunity. We're talking about opportunity by the communities that they're creating and the work they go on to do. They're creating opportunities for the next gen. So we have some examples of women in our networks who their husbands weren't necessarily eager for them to enter the workplace to run these businesses. They see the economic benefits to their family of having a successful side business in their family, to the point where the husbands now work for the company, the sons now work for the company, and the mother is the boss. And even importantly to the work that Jonathan and Krista were mentioning, daughters going to school when they didn't go to school before, but really everyone sits back and says, well, look at the economic inputs. Just from a personal perspective, our family is making so much more money by investing in girls and investing in these women. So I think, yes, these are the tools, and we think they're really important, the capital and the education, but it's that community building, which is just creating that lasting impact.
Fantastic. And I think you mentioned that 10,000 Women was founded in 2008, and clearly the environment, that enabling environment, has changed and shifted in lots of different ways. I would love to hear about what are the most exciting advancements that you've seen, and also what worries you, particularly in this pandemic.
I mean, there's so many exciting things that we should celebrate, not just 10,000 Women, but in the broader ecosystem of women's empowerment and support for women business owners. And we should definitely recognize that. And I'll end with something that we're excited about from a perspective of 10,000 Women. But just in terms of what worries us, I think, we do want to celebrate achievement. We do want to celebrate individual women who have done amazing things and stats, moving in the right direction. But what's a concern is when, progress in some areas sort of dulls the sense of urgency about the work that's still left to go. And I'm sure my fellow panelists would have had this experience where you have people come to you and say, well, I saw X woman become Prime Minister of this country, or Y percentage of women who, now making up board members. And you say, but that's not, we're not done. The implication with these comments are that the gender issue is sort of done, and everybody who's tuning in as well would agree we're far from being done. I want to mention just the access to capital side, because that's something we're incredibly focused on from our perspective. Women in emerging markets are massively underserved by financial institutions in emerging markets. We know that they make up a third of SMEs in those countries, but their lack of access to capital is contributing to this $1.5 trillion credit gap, which I know is mentioned a lot in our world. And from an economic perspective, that's just growth left on the table. It's simple economics, but it's more than that, because we know there's studies showing that women invest more than men into the health and education of their communities. They invest into their families, they invest social services into their communities. So giving women a chance to get access to the capital they need is so important. We know that it's not always just, purely they can't go to the bank and get the capital. In a lot of countries, there's cultural and societal barriers. The World Bank tracks a list of legislation around the world which is prohibiting women from fully, taking part in the business community. And these are things from not being able to have ID to not being able to own property. So the chances of a woman having the collateral requirements to get a loan in those countries are almost nil. So from a 10,000 Women perspective, yes, our partnership with the IFC is about getting more capital into the hands of women, but we also want to do more. We want to change this typical idea of what a banking customer is. We want to destigmatize this idea that banking on women is in any sort of way bad business, and to have such a majority of women entrepreneurs as banking customers that it's just normalized. This is just a normal thing. I'll end on a positive note. I mean, I think we can all agree the challenge, there's a lot of challenges still to tackle. What we're excited about it from a 10,000 Women perspective is, we're always looking to innovate and adapt. our course, our 10,000 Women Business Education course, in light of COVID, we've made that available to any woman around the world. And so not just for women entrepreneurs and not just for entrepreneurs in emerging markets. There's women all over the world that could benefit from this, particularly now. And, you know, we all need to throw everything we can at this, particularly in light of the stats you mentioned at the top of the session. So for anyone watching, anyone interested, do go and check out the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Women course, because, you know, finance, funding, negotiating, how to be a better leader, it's all there now for any woman.
That's great, but can we just go ahead and adapt that for girls? You can hook up with and Boys and Girls Club of America, digital delivery in a global pandemic of entrepreneurship training to a million girls at least.
No problem. We'll get it done by the weekend.
Yeah. We've got our agenda for later this afternoon. I do want to turn back to you. Thank you so much, Adele, for giving us a sense of what 10,000 Women has been up to. And Crystal, it's just such a great example, of course, of the private sector kind of coming in and addressing some of these gender gaps. I'm sure we have a number of sectors and industries represented in the audience today. So I'd love to sort of explore, you know, what are those skill sets that could be applied to closing some gender gaps here in the US? What would your recommended call of action be today? How can we create interventions that truly serve, as you said in the beginning, kind of the holistic needs of girls? You know, what's our charge today?
Yeah, so there's two things. And Adele, you said this so beautifully, but it is this continuum of intervention and really ensuring that we have across government, private, and public sectors, that we have investments specifically for women and girls. You know, I can say myself, I've reflected on my professional advancement. And one of my mentors says, work the job you have, but work the job you want. And so have always been able to think about, what does it look like to work the job that I want? But for some, they don't know what that looks like, right? And ensuring that we ensure success by having interventions and modeling what it looks like to be successful across various industries. And so we need an investment across sectors and really this public-private partnership to really make consistent investments that are evaluated so that we even know what are the best practices that we can replicate across different industries. The second piece is just naming that it doesn't matter if you're a girl and you transition to womanhood, that there is institutionalized and systemic inequality that women and then women of color experience. And I think one, really being clear about what are the business practices across sectors that ensure they're naming and they're thinking about how do these show up in the workplace. And then really thinking about and co-creating with those women, what are the interventions in the workspace that will ensure that women can be successful. I think, you know, through policies, through practices, but even in the conversations, even having affinity groups where women can feel safe enough to talk about what are the limitations and that they're models for them to be successful. I think about all of my mentors in youth development. And I think about there's only been a couple of women who I really said, I want to be just like you. Most of my mentors were men, and I'm thankful, right? So it challenges us to think about, yes, those women mentors, but what are the roles of men to use their privilege to support the unique needs of women, because we know that there are systemic inequities across various industries. And so that would be the rallying cry, is let's not forget that those things manifest in schools and in different professional settings, and just to be honest and walk into that very humbly about the change that needs to be made, and continuing, to Adele's point, to drive change even if we see progress. It's critical. Absolutely.
I think that if there are two things that this moment demands, it's honesty and humility. I think you've absolutely nailed what needs to kind of undergird our progress as we move forward. And the mention, Crystal, of men and the incredible role that they have played in your career advancement, it actually, I mean, it's important because everyone has a role to play in this, right? And it actually gets some of the questions I'm looking at over here in the chat box from the audience around a couple of them, actually. There's one that coming in that described how do men who want to help women level the playing field get involved with the organizations on this program. So I would love for all of you maybe to kind of to speak to that. There's another question just also for you to be thinking about on this line. How might we be able to involve boys and men more in the conversation about empowering women and girls to make this issue everyone's issue?
Absolutely. Well, from a Boys and Girls Club perspective, you know, we have 68,000 amazing professionals that work with young people every day, but we have thousands more of board members and volunteers who really leverage their expertise to mentor and to guide girls and boys in their identity development. And so what I would say is that in the youth development space in particular, in order to ensure that we have young people who are ready for certain industries, they need models. They need adults who are interested in making an investment to, one, understanding who they are as human beings first, and then secondly, being shoulder to shoulder with them and supporting them to see what does it look like. There was a great example. I was at a fundraiser for a local Boys and Girls Club. It was our premier program called Youth of the Year. And the organizers thought it was a really good idea to have the young girl leaders, they were in middle school, to sit at the tables with really important people, right? These were the congressmen and the chairmen and the big business men and women. And the girl that was sitting at the table with me, she was frightened. I mean, she was absolutely frightened. She didn't want to say anything. She didn't want to pick up her knife. She didn't want to pick up her napkin. She didn't want to go to the restroom. And so, you know, I was very observant. And so I leaned over and I said, how can I help you in this moment? And she said, tell me what to say. And such a powerful example that she was not ready to sit at the table. She did not understand the cultural norms of being at the table. And so what I would rally around is that we need you. We need your expertise to volunteer. We, Boys and Girls Club, are in every congressional district, but consider the lack of modeling and the unknown that young people they don't know. They don't know what it means to sit at that table and to pick up the knife and to lay the napkin in the lap. And so the responsibility is to understand who they are as people and help them sit at the table to ensure that their voices can be heard, that they can co-create, that they feel comfortable, that it is a safe and inclusive space. Critical. Every moment I take to ensure Jubilee, my daughter, who's age 4, can sit at any table. And that is a commitment that we need of anyone who engages with young girls as paid professionals or as volunteers. And so again, I thank you all in advance for that level of commitment because there are inequities that are clear, and then there are inequities that some of us never see because we don't know what that means and how that lands in certain communities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Crystal, and especially grateful for sharing that personal moment. And I am confident that you made such a difference in that girl's life as you do in so many others. So thank you so much. I also want to turn to the others on the panel to talk about this role that men and boys can play in modeling the kinds of behaviors. Particularly, Jonathan, I remember when we were prepping for this call, you talked about that idea of what are those invisible barriers, those norms that hold girls back from leaning forward into a conversation, into a moment that will test them, but also be a moment when they can demonstrate leadership. So we'd love to hear your thoughts as well on this question.
Yeah, I think what you raised now is so important, because boys are the victims of gender norms as much as girls are. I mean, girls are disproportionately affected, but we all live within these norms. And modeling is so critical. In so much of the work that we do and the work that Crystal does and the work that Adele does, we're bringing together women to provide them with those role models, to help them see what a different path might look like. And connection between girls and women is one way of establishing or providing that opportunity for modeling. At Girl Effect, we also use storytelling to do that. Mm-hmm. So we have a TV show in Ethiopia that's watched by a third of the population. And that TV show is not just for girls, it's for boys, it's for mothers, it's for fathers. And it's through that TV show that we are opening up girls' minds, boys' minds to what it means to be a girl. Something that Crystal said earlier about the role of identity really struck home for me, because there is both a girl's individual identity, who I am as a person, and then her social identity as a girl. And you need to be addressing both of those things. She needs to understand who she is, but then also have a different conception of what it can be to be a girl. What is the value of a girl in a community, for a family? I think mass media has an important role to play in changing perceptions and engaging men, engaging boys. We work with a number of different organizations to do that, because an enabling environment is a critical factor in empowering girls and women. And that enabling environment may mean access to capital or financial products. It may mean a family that supports a girl going to school, or a male friend that you can talk to. Some of our research has shown that there's a very strong correlation between positive friendships with men and the chances of a girl contracting HIV, for example. So in a lot of our work, we're modeling what positive relationships between girls and boys look like through the storytelling, through the role models that we provide girls with. And that is another important factor in making sure that girls are ready to take advantage of the opportunities. Because if they're not ready, it doesn't mean if the clinic is next door. She's never going to go there to talk to someone about family planning. Our perspective at Girl Effect is, while boys and men are an incredibly important and, in fact, an essential part of solving gender inequality, there are also needs that are particular to girls. Yeah. There are benefits to bringing girls together in community that can't be addressed when boys are in the mix. We see this ourselves. You know, bring girls into a private online space and they're going to talk about menstruation. If they're on Facebook or on social media, they're not going to share embarrassing questions. They're not going to express themselves, because they're not ready to be at that table to have those conversations. So we need to be balancing the larger conversation with boys and men and women, with the individual programming and services that we're providing and inspiration that we're providing to girls.
It's fascinating. I mean, I think part of what struck me was this idea that just because a program or an intervention is girl-centered doesn't mean that it's exclusionary, right? A girl-centered program is situated within the context of a community. The other, I was reminded of a story that I helped develop of a program, actually a research intervention in Venezuela, because they were seeing a high incidence of teenage girls getting pregnant, even after programmatic interventions that explain to them the facts around sexual intercourse, how you get pregnant. And here, by the way, is a clinic that you can go to access family planning resources. Well, guess what? If those girls had to walk by different houses where they would be seen going to the clinic, knowing that their neighbors were watching them, there's no way that they were going to go and access those family planning resources. So it's about, it's starting with the girl and then also widening the lens to understand how culture change is also an important factor, and gender norm change is an important factor in making sure that girls can close that loop from need to services, and then to kind of take off with the leadership that we know all girls are capable of. Adele, I'd love to also engage you in this question around the role of men, especially given your industry. What have you thought about, talked about in the design of 10,000 Women, and thinking about the future that kind of speaks to this question?
Well, it's funny you framed it by saying having men part of the conversation. Even this panel, the fact that we're 25% male on this panel is actually extremely unusual for the kind of events I go to. And I can see Crystal nodding. The number of times I go to an event where it's just women talking to other women, and I mean like no men in the room, is really kind of astounding. I think from our perspective, that speaks to this idea of it being normalized. I mean, in a perfect world, we wouldn't say women business owner. We would just say business owner or entrepreneur. And so I think how men can be part of the solution is to help get there, that we're not talking about it being a women's issue. I mean, if you want to be really blunt, it's an economic issue. It's better for everybody if women have full participation. So not pulling this out as a women's entrepreneurship issue or a women's issue. And another thing that you said earlier, Tara, which really struck me was about honesty and having honest conversations. When we think about our access to capital work that we do, we actually had, in some cases, it's us going out to the financial institutions and saying, look, you're not serving women, in the numbers that you should be. But in a number of cases, which is really, heartening to me, it's these male-run banks that are coming to us and saying, we don't serve women and we don't know why we're not getting it right. We want to do better. We don't know what we're doing. We're not doing it. Give us the tools, give us the help to carve off women as a much larger customer base. Now, whether that comes from the fact that their competitor bank in the region is starting to be known as the women's friendly bank, whether it's just the right thing to do, we don't care. We just want to get in there and help. But it's about that idea of that being honesty, that we do have it. These banks are saying we do have a distinction between how we treat men and women, and it's all contributing to ultimately. And I hope we never have a panel like this again in 50 years, where we never have to talk about women's or girls' issues carved off. They're just issues.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective, Adele. And it does seem like it's a move forward. It's a step forward. If you do have banks coming to you to try and get your help to figure out how to do this right, whatever their motivations might be in the moment. I mean, look, let's just celebrate that progress and then just try to build on that. So I know we're starting to get a little bit close on time. In terms of how to close off this panel, I mean, Crystal, you shared such a powerful story about a girl with whom you had that interaction. I'd love to also ask Jonathan and Adele to come in, and Crystal, please feel free to share another to close us out. A story of a girl or a woman who is working in her way to change her own life with the support of you and your organizations, working to close her gender gap. So maybe Adele, could you get us started?
Yeah, I mean, if this panel went for 8 hours, I would have content to fill
sure.
with these stories because we're so lucky to get to know all these entrepreneurs. But one of them I'll pull out, her name is Wambui, and I mean, she's an amazing graduate of our program. She personally just opened my eyes so much to entrepreneurship in a very, benign, she thought, comment that she made. She said she gets so frustrated when she hears about, I should say she's from Kenya. She gets so frustrated when she sees this romanticized idea of entrepreneurship. And you'll see in movies and literature, there's this guy or a girl who has a passion project and they decide to go for their goal of this thing they've always had a passion for, maybe leave a really well-paying job and throw everything they have at their passion project. And she just said to me when I met her in person for the first time, she said, I can't stand that romanticized version. For women in Africa, entrepreneurship is survival. It's not passion. I need to survive. So Wambui was a successful marketer, lost her job, single mother, and as she put it, she had no choice but to succeed. There was no option of failing. She had her son to look after. So identified white space by chance, going to get her son's hair done, and realized that he needed a special service. So with no background in this area, opened up one of the first child-specific hair salons in Nairobi. And she now runs a thriving business. She's looking to expand into product lines. But again, this didn't come from a passion for hair. This came from a need to survive. Mm-hmm. What I love about her story is that Wambui pays it forward, like, so many of our women, incredible. She makes a point to almost exclusively hire single mothers. and women with no expertise in the area, no formal training. And she feels a sense of, social obligation that she takes them on, gives them a chance when no one else is giving them a chance, trains them up. And now the majority of her, 20 strong workforce is single mothers, just like she was. So that's just one example. And as I say, force my mute because I'll keep talking. But I know Jonathan will have stories to share as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adele. Jonathan, do you want to share a story as well? Please, thanks.
Yes, Tara, it's interesting, but during the course of this conversation, how I'm choosing to answer the question has changed. So I've got a lot of different stories of individual girls, but I think it's important for us to recognize that those stories can only go so far in helping us understand what is changing. And it doesn't matter if one girl's life has changed, or if there's a female CEO, or if there's a female president. Because unless everything changes underneath them, unless there is real equitable redistribution of resources, then it doesn't matter how many of these great case studies we have, or tearjerker movies that we've produced telling the story of what Girl Effect has done. We have to be looking at the data. Like, what are we seeing in the data that's telling us that millions of girls' lives are changing, not just the 100 that enrolled in the Safe Space program, or the 10,000 who are engaged in another service that we're providing to them. So I want to resist making people feel good about the individual stories a little bit, to say, like, look at the numbers and let's make sure that the numbers are meaningful.
That's fantastic. I mean, I love that in this wrap up, we're still continuing to challenge ourselves and figure out what is the right measurement of success in the long run. We celebrate a lot of these individual stories, and that's important. And we need to be looking across at the data, which already, for reasons we all know, is difficult to access, disaggregated by gender. So there are all these kind of structural things that we need to be mindful of. And unless we fix those, we're never going to have nearly the number of individual stories that we would want and hope for. Crystal, is there anything else that you would like to add before we wrap up?
Only two things. Adele, I want to tell you thank you, because my mother owns and operates a funeral home on the south side of Chicago, and she actually went through the Goldman Sachs program. And through that, right, we know funeral homes, that business feels like super straightforward, but she's reimagined what that business can be, the services to the community. She does health screenings and health fairs and jazz concerts in the garden, and has, I can't share this, but a new project launching later this month. And so she's so appreciative, and I have just seen how she's blossomed, and it's been so inspiring. So I wanted to tell you thank you.
Oh, that's amazing.
And Tara, yeah, I was like, Mom, I think you were in this program. She's like, yes. And I would be remiss, Tara, the out of school time sector and all of the organizations, small to medium to big, I would be remiss if I didn't shout all of them out, because I'm sure they're represented on this call. The work that we do is so important for girls, and it requires partnerships, right? One organization will not solve all of the issues for girls, and the power of partnerships across sectors. So I am very grateful in the out of school time space to have such amazing collaborators to say, where are you? What are your needs? Because we all start and stop, and we should be okay. And so thank you to all of you who represent girl organizations all over the world, for girls and women, and appreciate your partnership in every way. So, Tara, thank you.
Amazing way to close us out. Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Adele. I see that I still probably have a minute left, so I'm going to exercise the privilege of the moderator to ask each of you to do something that I've been doing in my Zoom meetings lately, which is to just have you offer one word of reflection before we close the session that expresses how you're feeling right now. So Adele, can I turn to you first?
Gosh, I don't know if I could do it in a word, but I would. My sentiment would be, we just got to keep our foot on the pedal and just keep going at this. This is more than ever a time to keep going. That's 20 words.
Accelerate. How about accelerate?
Yeah, accelerate. There you go.
Jonathan?
Determined.
Crystal? Oh, I can't hear you. I want to make sure I do.
Got it. Just a small phrase. We need to pivot as necessary.
Great phrase. I would say for me, hopeful. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you especially to our amazing panelists, Adele, Jonathan, Crystal. The work that you're doing is so important. And so I thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I hope that we can all stay in touch, convene again in real life, and give a big, real hug. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.
Thank you so much.
And Crystal.